Now, when you guys first started, kind of, what was your vision for the theater? Like, I guess, down, 20 years later, how did you envision it to be? What did you think it would be?
We were so busy producing every show that it was like we would open a show on, say, Friday night, and Monday we would start rehearsing for the next show, which sounds really crazy, but we had no other way to earn money, and so we thought, well, that's one way to earn money, is to keep the shows going. And so we were really quite busy. Not that we're any less busy now, but we just kept our heads down and just kept working. And so the vision was like we were describing, but the work is what kept us going. And then, of course, meeting different artists, different people along the way, and that changed us and influenced us tremendously in the direction that we would go. Ellen Stewart, who is La Mama in New York, who has passed away now, but she was our spiritual mother, and she started her theater back in the late 50s in New York. And she always said, work with people, don't worry about the product, work with people. And that's really how we followed our hearts, and that's how we sort of met this person and that person. We ended up working with Sam Shepard and collaborating with him, and Joseph Chaikin, lots of names maybe you know or you don't know, but important theater artists, especially coming out of the alternative theater movement in the late 60s in the Lower East Side of New York.
I'd say also that we, when we started, we had these sort of common goals, and then we began to realize, well, there's a world outside of this little Five Points neighborhood, and we should find out about it. And so that took us into international contacts. And just like when we started Seven Stages, we had no money to pay for international contacts. So we had to scrounge the money up, get part-time jobs, and then go travel to these places where we thought we wanted to have connections. And shortly thereafter, within a couple of years, we began to make good enough contacts that we had real connections in many countries, especially in Europe, but also some South African connections that checked out. And all of these resources brought money with them, as well as major artists from the different countries. So we were able to create a lot of relationships with companies and artists in other countries.
We wouldn't have had the opportunity. We had a wonderful woman, Uta Bautacine, who ran the Goethe Institute, which was the cultural arm of the German government. And she invited us, the two of us, to go on a 2.5-month tour to Germany, all expenses paid, as guests of the government, and to meet German artists. And we met a lot of really important, critics and reviewers and magazine publishers. And then they introduced us to people that we would have never known about, like Boto Strauss, for example, and Achtenbusch, and so we had the ability to produce a lot of those shows because they supported them. They wanted German theater in America. They were trying to still at that point kind of make themselves not so bad like the Germans. They wanted us to see a good side of them, and so they were very supportive of us. But then when the wall came down in '89, all their money, really had to go to the East, because they had to upgrade the East and support their theaters, and so their vision for giving money outside of the country kind of dried up a little bit. But and it's just been like that. Like, we just meet people and they invite us. We were doing a Mexican performance here with a collaboration with a Mexican theater company, and there was the French consul, not the consul general, but the cultural consul, was in the audience, and she just came up to Del and she was, I don't understand, you do all these shows with Poland and Mexico, what's wrong with France? And so then we got money from France, and we started going to France. I don't know, I think we were just blessed or whatever. But mostly through people, always through people, that was the important part.
Wow. Well, it kind of, maybe this is a bad analogy, but it kind of reminds me how you kind of fall into things like kind of like a Forrest Gump type of thing, right? Yeah. You just end up here. How to end up in it? Work with these international companies.
There's more than a little bit of Forrest Gump in all of us. No question about it.
But I think we were smart. There's a line in this, but I think we were smart, is if you're given the opportunity, we took it. We didn't let it slip through our fingers. And then we were people that people liked and respected our work, and so it made a bridge, artistic bridge. And Joseph Chaikin came down from New York one of the first times. We had a very nice grant to support him from TCG, and he came, I think it was like 10 or 15 years, for one show every year. And the the reviewer or the interviewer asked, they said, Joe, why 7 stages? Why Atlanta? And he said, mostly I like Del and Faye. That was his answer. So.
But we learned something from every one of these collaborations, which was so remarkable. It wasn't just like, oh, we're making connections in the international world, and isn't that wonderful, and our world is better therefore. It was rather specific, and I remember one time we did a South African play called Kana, He is Coming Home, by what was at the time referred to as a colored South African. So this was a guy of mixed race descent. He was the head of the Department of Sociology at a major university in Cape Town. He was a published poet, and he did this play about how the South African men were leaving South Africa to go to Canada, get educated, and then they wouldn't come back to South Africa. Understandably, at that time, they preferred to stay in Canada in a non-apartheid country. And so I remember we're standing in rehearsal one night, 2 in the morning or something, and some actress didn't have her lines down right, and it was a pain in the neck for everybody. And Adam just stepped onto the stage and said, nothing matters but the struggle. And that phrase has stuck with me all my life, because no matter what happens, that is the truth. And there are other examples like that we can point out, but that sort of formed I guess a kind of a spiritual floor for the theater that's been maintained ever since.
And we have certain little benchmarks. Like our phones were tapped by BOSS, which is the South African, undercover?
Secret police.
Secret Service. Because we were doing these South African plays, and they were actually members of that institution were in our theater because Adam recognized them.
Wow.
So we knew they were there, and you could hear the clicks on the phone when you would use the phone. We were also marched against, I guess, by the Ku Klux Klan in 1986. We were doing an anti-Klan play, and they showed up in the parking lot, and they were ready to take us down.
Wow.
So we haven't always made friends.
We were very choosy.
Wow, that's pretty crazy. As you're kind of accumulating these international contacts and you're kind of, rubbing people the wrong way, in a good way.
The wrong people.
the wrong people in the wrong way. Was there ever a time as you were starting that you feel like, you know what, I think we made a good decision by doing this?
Oh, yeah, I think we always
I think
like
when
a
we
particular
left
moment?
a couple of years ago.
Yeah, we retired 3 years ago. Oh.
That's a good question. Yeah. I think that happened to me many times. I mean, I couldn't begin to count the number of times I felt we made the right choice over our 30-some years of deciding to stay here and not, pursue a real life or a career elsewhere and earn money and stuff like that. Yeah. That far outweighs the negatives, but no question about it. And every single production was like that, a microcosm of that. It was always something major and uplifting, but usually a lot of major uplifts and then a couple of defeats and things like that. And the defeats you always forget about, but those major positives stick with you.